Sam and Claire Turner were the picture of a modern couple. They had been married for 10 years, living in a spacious home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. On the surface, they seemed happy, with careers that kept them busy, a couple of young kids, and a comfortable life. But beneath the surface, their relationship was anything but typical. They had an open marriage, an arrangement where they both had the freedom to pursue relationships with others while remaining married to each other. It wasn't always that way. At first, their marriage had been full of passion and affection, but over the years, they began to grow apart. Sam, a successful businessman, spent long hours at the office, while Claire, a creative director at an advertising agency, was often away for work. Both of them felt the strain of their careers on their relationship, and slowly the spark faded. One evening, during a candid conversation over dinner, Claire brought up the idea of an open marriage. She had been reading about it and felt that it might help them reconnect while still respecting each other's need for independence. Sam, initially hesitant, agreed. They set boundaries. They would each have relationships with others, but they would always communicate openly about it and respect each other's feelings. At first, it was exciting. Sam began dating a woman named Lisa, a colleague from work, while Claire found comfort in the arms of a man named Jack. They had rules in place: no secrets, no emotional attachments, and no lies. But as time went on, the arrangement became more complicated. The boundaries they had set started to blur, and emotions they hadn't expected started to interfere. Sam found himself becoming increasingly jealous of Claire's connection with Jack. It wasn't just physical anymore. Claire and Jack were beginning to form a deeper emotional bond, something Sam had feared all along. Meanwhile, Claire was struggling with her own feelings. She had become more attached to Jack than she had anticipated, and she began to question her place in Sam's life. One night, Sam and Claire had a heated argument. Sam accused Claire of falling in love with Jack, while Claire accused Sam of growing cold and distant. They yelled at each other for hours, but when the dust settled, they both knew something had to change. The open marriage, once seen as a way to keep their love alive, now felt like a dangerous experiment that was tearing them apart. Sam's jealousy started to consume him. He began following Claire and Jack, watching their every move, trying to find proof of what he feared. Claire, feeling trapped and suffocated, started to distance herself from Sam. The emotional distance between them grew wider, and what had once been a solution to their problems now seemed like the root cause of their pain. But what neither Sam nor Claire knew was that their lives were about to take a turn for the worse. The fragile balance they had been trying to maintain was about to crumble in the most tragic way imaginable. The phone call came late one night. Claire's heart raced as she picked up the receiver. "Claire Turner?" The voice on the other end was calm, but there was a hint of urgency. "There's been an incident. You need to come to the hospital." Her stomach dropped. She knew deep down that something terrible had happened. But as she drove to the hospital, she had no idea just how devastating the news would be. Claire arrived at the hospital with her heart pounding in her chest. She could barely see through the blur of tears that were already welling in her eyes. It was late, almost midnight, but the lights in the emergency room were blinding. She ran to the receptionist, her voice shaky as she asked, "I was told my husband, Sam Turner, was brought in. What happened? Is he okay?" The receptionist looked at her sympathetically, her face painted with the kind of expression that immediately told Claire something was wrong. "I'm afraid we can't give you all the details, ma'am, but I can take you to him." As they walked down the sterile, echoing hallways, Claire's mind raced. Sam had been acting strange lately. Jealous, possessive, distant. But she never imagined something like this could happen. She hoped it was just a misunderstanding, maybe a minor accident at work. But deep down, she feared it was something worse. The nurse led her into a small room. Sam was lying on a bed, unconscious, connected to various machines. His face was bruised and swollen, and there was a bandage on his head. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she tried to process what she was seeing. Her husband, someone she had known for over a decade, looked like a stranger. "Is he going to be okay?" Claire asked, her voice barely a whisper. The nurse hesitated for a moment before answering. "We're doing everything we can, but it's serious. He suffered a head injury, and it's still unclear how much damage there is. He's in critical condition." Claire felt her knees go weak. She collapsed into the chair beside the bed, her hands trembling as she held Sam's hand. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion. How did this happen? Who would do this to him? As Claire sat there, trying to piece together the events that had led to this moment, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was somehow to blame. Had their open marriage pushed Sam to this? Had his jealousy spiraled out of control? Or was this something else entirely? Just as Claire's thoughts were spiraling into panic, a police officer walked into the room. He was tall, with a calm demeanor that contrasted sharply with the chaos Claire was feeling. He introduced himself as Detective Mark Collins. "I'm sorry to disturb you, ma'am," Detective Collins began, "but I need to ask you a few questions about your husband. I understand this is a difficult time, but any information you can provide will help us understand what happened." Claire nodded, trying to steady her breath. She wiped her eyes, her mind still foggy. "Of course, I'll help however I can. Do you know if your husband has had any recent problems with anyone?" Detective Collins asked. "Has he had any conflicts, either at work or with friends? Any reason someone might want to hurt him?" Claire thought for a moment. Sam's business was thriving, but he had been acting increasingly paranoid over the past few months. He had mentioned feeling like someone was trying to sabotage his career, but she never took him seriously. His jealousy about her relationship with Jack was also growing, though Claire had never suspected that it might lead to violence. "No," Claire said softly, shaking her head. "I don't know of anyone who would want to hurt him. He's been jealous of Jack, but I don't think he would hurt anyone because of it." Detective Collins nodded, writing something down in his notebook. "We found traces of alcohol and some prescription medication in his system," he said, looking at her carefully. "It doesn't seem like an accident. There are signs of blunt force trauma to his head, but we'll need to run more tests to determine if anything else was involved." Claire's heart sank. "Blunt force trauma?" she repeated, feeling the coldness of the words wrap around her. "We're still investigating, ma'am," the detective assured her. "But we need to understand what happened before we can make any conclusions. If you think of anything, anything at all, please don't hesitate to reach out." As the detective left the room, Claire was left alone with her thoughts. She stared at Sam's unconscious form, her mind racing. Who could have done this to him, and why? Could Jack be involved? Or had Sam's jealousy pushed him to do something drastic to himself? But then another thought crossed her mind, one that made her stomach churn. Could this have been planned? Was this the result of something darker lurking in the shadows of their marriage? The open marriage that had once been a way to save their relationship now seemed like a ticking time bomb. Claire's thoughts were interrupted when the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. A figure appeared at the door. Jack. His face was pale, and his eyes were filled with worry. "Claire, I heard what happened," he said, his voice shaky. Is he okay?" Claire looked at him, her mind spinning. She had told Jack about Sam's condition, but seeing him here, standing in the doorway, made her heart race with suspicion. Jack stepped into the room slowly, his eyes darting between Claire and Sam's unconscious form. He seemed genuinely concerned, but Claire couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in her chest. She had known Jack for months now, ever since she had met him at a work event. He had become someone she leaned on during the rough patches in her marriage. But as she looked at him now, she couldn't help but wonder, was he involved in all of this somehow? "Claire?" Jack's voice trembled as he approached her. "I'm so sorry. I never thought anything like this would happen. Do you know what happened? Have the doctors said anything?" Claire's eyes narrowed as she glanced at him. There was a moment of silence before she spoke, her voice calm but sharp. "What do you mean, Jack? How did you know to come here? I just found out myself." She could feel the tension building between them, and she wasn't sure if it was the grief or something else making her feel this way. She wanted answers, but she wasn't sure if Jack was the person to give them. I, Jack paused, swallowing hard. "I heard about it from Lisa. She called me. She's been working with Sam, and she said he was hurt. I thought I'd come by to support you both." Claire didn't respond right away. She studied Jack's face, searching for any hint of deceit. Something wasn't adding up. Jack and Sam had always kept a cordial distance, but there was a subtle rivalry between them that Claire had noticed on a few occasions. It wasn't overt, but it was there. Jack's charm was undeniable, but sometimes it felt like he was trying a little too hard to prove himself to Sam. Claire's mind returned to that night when Sam had started to spiral, accusing her of becoming too close to Jack. Sam had said that Jack was manipulating her, that he was trying to drive a wedge between them. She hadn't believed him at the time, thinking it was just his jealousy speaking. But now, after everything that had happened, Claire wasn't so sure. "Claire, I know this is hard, but if there's anything I can do to help..." Jack trailed off, his voice filled with a mixture of concern and hesitation. The door to the room opened, interrupting their conversation. Detective Collins stepped in, his eyes scanning the room before landing on Claire. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, his tone firm but polite. "But I need to speak with you, ma'am, alone." Claire stood up, her eyes briefly flicking to Jack. "I'll be right back," she said, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring Jack or herself. As she followed the detective into the hallway, Claire's heart raced. The questions in her mind were swirling faster now, and she couldn't ignore the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She needed answers. About Sam, about Jack, about everything. "I need to ask you a few more questions, Claire," Detective Collins began once they were away from the hospital room. "And I know this isn't easy, but I need you to think back carefully. Did Sam ever say anything that might help us understand what happened? Did he have any enemies? Anyone who might have wanted to hurt him?" Claire paused, her hands trembling. She thought about the past few months, Sam's growing anger, his suspicions, his jealousy. She thought about Jack and the way he had acted around her and Sam. Could he have been more than just a lover? Could there have been something deeper, something darker between them? "No," she said softly, shaking her head. "Sam didn't have any enemies, at least not that I knew of. He'd been stressed with work lately, but nothing that seemed like it would lead to this." Detective Collins seemed to consider this for a moment before he spoke again. "We've looked into some things, Claire. We found a few interesting details during our initial investigation. First, we found that Sam's phone had been wiped clean, deleted text messages, emails, even call logs. The only thing that wasn't erased were his conversations with you." Claire's stomach turned. "What are you saying? That Sam was hiding something from me?" "I'm not making any conclusions just yet," Collins replied, his eyes steady on her. "But there's more. We found traces of prescription medication in his system, as I mentioned earlier. But we also found something else. Traces of the same medication in Jack's system." Claire's breath caught in her throat. "Jack?" she whispered, the word tasting like betrayal. "What does that mean? Are you saying Jack did this to him?" The detective held up a hand, signaling for calm. "Not necessarily. It's possible Sam took the medication himself, or it could have been something more sinister. We don't have all the facts yet, but we do know Jack was nearby when the incident occurred. Lisa confirmed that he was one of the last people to see Sam before he was found unconscious." Claire's mind raced. The walls felt like they were closing in on her. The following days passed in a blur for Claire. Sam remained unconscious, clinging to life in the hospital, while the investigation into his injury intensified. Detective Collins had been diligent, his questions growing more probing with each passing hour. Claire found herself in a whirlwind of interviews, phone calls, and sleepless nights. The once calm, suburban life she had known was now shattered by uncertainty and fear. As Claire sat by Sam's bedside, her thoughts continued to spiral. She had tried to block out the nagging suspicion in the back of her mind that perhaps Jack was hiding something, but what could he possibly want from Sam? They weren't close friends, and Claire had never imagined that Jack could be involved in something like this. Jack had been by the hospital every day since the incident, always offering support and asking if there was anything he could do. But there was a coldness in his demeanor now, something Claire couldn't ignore. He no longer seemed like the compassionate man she had turned to in her moments of doubt. Instead, he seemed distant, almost calculated. His attempts at comfort felt hollow, like he was playing a role. She began to wonder, was Jack truly concerned for Sam's well-being, or was he using this tragedy as an opportunity to keep Claire close? One evening, as Claire walked out of the hospital cafeteria, she ran into Lisa, Sam's colleague who had been the one to notify Jack about Sam's injury. Lisa had been a frequent visitor over the past few days, but Claire hadn't had a chance to talk to her one-on-one. Now, with the hospital buzzing with the late-night shift, she finally found herself alone with Lisa in the dimly lit hallway. "Lisa," Claire began, her voice tentative, "can we talk for a minute?" Lisa looked startled, but quickly nodded. "Of course, Claire. What's on your mind?" Claire hesitated, wondering how much she should reveal. "You were the one who called Jack, right? You told him Sam was hurt?" Lisa's face softened. "Yes, I did. I thought he should know right away. Sam and Jack, they were always on good terms. I didn't think it would cause any problems." "Why? Is there something I should know?" Claire studied Lisa carefully. Lisa had always been warm, friendly, someone she could rely on for advice. But now, with the pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place, Claire wondered how much of what she saw was real. "I'm just trying to understand," Claire said slowly, her words weighed with suspicion. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened in the past few weeks. Sam has been acting strange, and I know you've been close with him. Did he ever say anything to you that could explain any of this?" Lisa's eyes flickered nervously. "Sam's been under a lot of stress lately. Work's been tough on him. You know how he is. Always working, always pushing himself. But no, Claire, I swear, he never mentioned anything that would explain all this. He was just frustrated mostly." Claire noticed the subtle shift in Lisa's tone. There was something off about the way she said frustrated, like she was trying to avoid something. Claire pressed on. "Frustrated with what exactly? Was it just work, or was there something else? Was it his relationship with me, or with Jack?" Claire's words felt sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. Lisa flinched, her eyes darting away. She seemed to be struggling with something. I, I don't know if I should be the one to say anything, Claire. I think you should talk to Jack about it." "Talk to Jack about what?" Claire demanded, her voice rising now. "I need to understand what's going on, Lisa. Please." After a long pause, Lisa let out a shaky breath and finally spoke. "I didn't want to get involved, but Sam, he was really upset about something. He was angry about Jack, about you and Jack." Claire's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to hear this. "What do you mean? What was he angry about?" "Sam thought Jack was getting too close to you," Lisa said quietly, almost regretfully. "He felt like Jack was pushing boundaries. And Sam started suspecting things, Claire. He thought Jack was trying to take you away from him, that he was trying to replace him." Claire's mind raced as she processed Lisa's words. She had suspected Sam's jealousy, but hearing it out loud sent a chill down her spine. Jack had been the one who had always seemed like the perfect solution to their marriage problems. He had been the one who had offered comfort when things between her and Sam were strained, but now it was clear that Sam had seen Jack as a threat. "But why didn't Sam tell me?" Claire whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "Why didn't he trust me enough to talk to me about it?" Lisa lowered her gaze. "He didn't know how. He was hurt, Claire. He didn't know if you'd listen. He felt like he was losing you. And Jack, well, Jack never made it easy. He always acted so smooth, so perfect." The words hung in the air between Claire and Jack, like an unspoken threat. She couldn't decide whether to feel relief or dread as she stared at him. The detective had already uncovered the traces of medication in Jack's system, and now Claire was faced with him, the man who had been so close to her, but whose true intentions she was only beginning to grasp. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she awaited his explanation. Jack shifted uneasily, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I know this doesn't look good, Claire, but I swear I didn't hurt Sam." Claire's heart pounded in her chest, her fingers gripping the railing by her side. "Then why did you come here, Jack? Why have you been around so much? Why were you the one Sam suspected?" Jack's eyes flickered briefly with something that almost resembled guilt before he sighed. "I never wanted to hurt anyone, Claire. It's just, this whole situation has gotten out of control. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Claire felt her breath catch. "What do you mean by that? What exactly are you saying?" Jack swallowed, his jaw tightening. "I've been seeing you, Claire. He hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether to go on. I've been in love with you for a long time, but I never acted on it, not until everything with Sam started falling apart. Claire's mind spun. She had always thought of Jack as a confidant, someone who had been there when she and Sam were struggling. But now, hearing him admit his feelings for her, the entire dynamic shifted. She had been so wrapped up in her own turmoil, she hadn't even considered that Jack might have an agenda of his own. "You've been in love with me?" Claire's voice trembled, a mix of anger and confusion rising within her. "And you never told me? Instead, you let Sam suffer through his suspicions, his jealousy? Why?" Jack took a step closer, his face softened by a desperate look. "I didn't want to betray Sam, Claire. He was my friend. But when he started pushing you away, I could see what was happening. You were pulling away from him, and I could feel it. He wasn't the same person you fell in love with anymore. And I just—" Claire cut him off, her voice sharp. "You just what? Took advantage of it?" Jack looked down at the floor, visibly shaken. "I didn't take advantage of anything. I never meant for Sam to find out, and I never meant for it to turn into this." Claire's heart was racing, but a sickening feeling churned in her stomach. Something wasn't right. Jack's words sounded like he was trying to justify something, but he was not giving her a clear explanation. His tone had shifted, and Claire wasn't sure if he was hiding something or if his emotions were just running wild. There was a darkness to him that she hadn't noticed before, a darkness she now feared could be much more dangerous than she had imagined. "Then tell me the truth, Jack," Claire said, her voice firm, even as her hands shook. "What happened the night Sam was hurt? Why didn't you call for help when you were with him? Why are you avoiding the questions Detective Collins has been asking? Why are you acting so suspicious?" Jack's gaze dropped to the floor, his mouth opening and closing as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Finally, he muttered something barely audible, his voice cracking. "I didn't mean to hurt him. It just happened. We were arguing, and things got out of hand." Claire's mind raced as she tried to piece together what Jack was saying. The fragments of his words didn't make sense. "Arguing? Over what, Jack? What could you have argued about that would lead to this?" "I didn't want him to know, Claire. I thought I could keep it a secret. But Sam was getting suspicious, and when he confronted me, things got ugly. He was going to leave you. He wanted to end everything, to walk away from our arrangement, and I couldn't let that happen." "Arrangement?" Claire echoed, feeling a chill run through her. "What arrangement, Jack? What are you talking about?" Jack met her gaze for the first time, his eyes dark and filled with regret. "Our open marriage, Claire. Sam agreed to it. We all agreed to it." The words hit Claire like a slap. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she struggled to comprehend what Jack was saying. Open marriage? Sam had agreed to that? Claire had never fully understood the complexities of Sam and Jack's relationship, but she had trusted Sam. She had trusted that their marriage, however unconventional, was based on mutual understanding and respect. But now everything was unraveling. "No," Claire whispered, her voice shaky. "Sam never told me about any arrangement, Jack. I didn't agree to that." Jack's face twisted in frustration, and he stepped closer to her. "I know you didn't, Claire. I never wanted you to find out like this. But you need to understand, Sam was getting too possessive, too controlling." Detective Collins watched Jack closely, his gaze never wavering. He was a seasoned investigator, skilled in reading people, and he knew something was off. Jack's admission about the open marriage was the first crack in the case, but it wasn't enough to determine who was truly behind Sam's injuries. Claire stood off to the side, her thoughts racing as she processed everything Jack had said. There were still too many unanswered questions. "Jack, we need you to come with us," Collins said, his voice calm but firm. "You're not under arrest, but we need to get some things cleared up." Jack hesitated, glancing at Claire before reluctantly nodding. He walked toward Collins, his shoulders slumped, his expression a mix of guilt and resignation. Claire's heart was still heavy, but she needed answers. Answers that only Jack could provide. "I'll go with you," Jack said quietly. "But I swear I didn't do anything to hurt Sam." "I'm not making any assumptions just yet," Collins replied. "I'm just following the evidence." As they left the house, Claire lingered behind, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The detective had already been to the scene of the incident, gathering evidence and speaking to neighbors. Sam's injuries were severe, but there were no signs of forced entry or struggle in the house. The detectives had yet to figure out how it all played out, and Claire felt a sickening feeling in her stomach. Inside the interrogation room, Jack was seated at a metal table, his hands resting nervously in his lap. Colin stood across from him, leaning against the wall, watching him silently. The tension in the room was palpable. Claire had no idea how long Jack would last under the pressure of Colin's questioning. "I want to make one thing clear," Collins began, his voice cool and professional. "This is an open investigation. I'm not accusing you of anything yet, but the sooner you start telling the truth, the better off we all will be." Jack looked up at Collins, his eyes tired and defeated. "I already told you everything I know. I didn't hurt Sam. I didn't even touch him that night." Collins narrowed his eyes. "You're telling me that Sam's injuries, his bruises, the cuts, weren't caused by anything you did?" Jack hesitated. "No, I didn't hurt him. I never laid a hand on him." Claire sat in the waiting area outside the interrogation room, her mind running in circles. She was certain Jack was hiding something. But what? Was it possible that Sam's injuries were a result of something other than Jack? Maybe it was someone else, someone with a motive to hurt Sam. But who? Suddenly, the door to the interrogation room opened, and Collins stepped out. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes betrayed a sense of frustration. He nodded toward Claire, signaling for her to follow him. "I think we've hit a wall with Jack for now," Collins said as they walked back to the main office. "He's not giving us anything useful." Claire's stomach churned. She had hoped that Jack's confession would be the breakthrough they needed, but it hadn't been. She couldn't shake the feeling that Jack was involved, but his lack of remorse, his brokenness, it all seemed so complicated. She wasn't sure if he was guilty or just deeply troubled. "There's something more to this, detective," Claire said, her voice quiet but determined. "I don't think Jack is the only one involved. There's something he's not telling you. Something important." Collins raised an eyebrow. "What makes you think that?" Claire looked him squarely in the eye. "When I spoke to Jack earlier, he was evasive. He's hiding something. He kept referring to our open marriage. But I don't think it's as simple as that. There's something darker going on, and I think he knows it." Collins sighed, rubbing his temples. "I agree, but right now we don't have much to go on. We'll need to take a closer look at Sam's relationships, his friends, his business partners, anyone who might have had a motive to hurt him." Claire nodded, her thoughts still racing. She had to believe that the truth would come to light, but right now it felt like every lead was getting them nowhere. That night, the detective team reviewed the security footage from the neighborhood. They had been able to retrieve footage from a nearby store, and something caught Colin's eye. It was a figure in a hoodie, walking towards Sam and Claire's house around the time of the incident. The footage wasn't clear enough to make out the person's face, but the timing matched up with the injuries. Collins stared at the screen, a slow realization dawning on him. "This isn't Jack," he muttered under his breath. This wasn't Jack at all. Claire had been waiting in the office when Collins walked back in, his face pale. His next words shook her to the core. "It wasn't Jack, but I think we may have just found our real suspect." The weight of Detective Collins' words hung in the air as Claire tried to process what he had just said. It wasn't Jack, he had said. The realization that everything she thought she knew might be wrong was too much to bear. She had spent days convinced that Jack was involved, perhaps out of jealousy or a twisted love for her. But now Collins was telling her that the case had just taken a dramatic turn. "Who was it then?" Claire asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and disbelief. She had hoped for answers, but the truth seemed to be slipping further away with each passing moment. Collins sat down across from her, pulling a stack of photographs from his folder. He began to lay them out on the table one by one. At first, they seemed like ordinary images. A blurry figure in a hoodie walking down the street, the reflection of a car in a window, and then a close-up of a man's face, partially obscured by shadows. Claire's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the man in the photo. "No," she whispered, staring at the image. It can't be. The face was unmistakable. It was David, a longtime friend of Sam's. She had never suspected him in all the time she'd known him. David had been at their wedding, had attended their social gatherings, and had even shared drinks with Sam at the bar just a few weeks before the incident. Claire never would have believed that he could be involved in something like this. Collins leaned forward, his gaze steady. We checked the footage from the store cameras. The person we saw walking toward your house wasn't Jack. It was David. Claire shook her head, trying to process the information. But why? Why would David do something like this? He was one of Sam's closest friends. They've known each other for years. That's what we need to figure out, Collins said. David's history with Sam goes back a long way, and there's something in that history that doesn't add up. We've started looking into his finances, his relationships, and his behavior over the last few months. There are signs that he was hiding something, a lot of somethings. Claire felt a cold chill spread through her. What do you mean? What's he hiding? Collins didn't answer immediately. He stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the darkening sky. David had been in a lot of financial trouble lately. We've tracked his recent transactions, and it seems he had been borrowing money from Sam. A lot of money. Sam had been helping him out, but there was no record of David paying it back. And according to some of Sam's close friends, David had been pressuring Sam for more financial help, but Sam had started pulling back. That's when things started to sour between them. Claire sat back in her chair, stunned. So David was in debt to Sam? Not just that, Collins said, turning back to face her. David had also been involved in an affair with someone close to Sam. Someone who's been in Sam's life for years. The words hit Claire like a blow to the chest. Who? Collins hesitated for a moment before answering. It was Rachel, Sam's business partner. Claire's eyes widened in shock. Rachel? Sam's business partner? But they seemed so professional together. I had no idea. That's the thing, Collins said, his voice darkening. Nobody did. But Rachel and David were having an affair, and Sam had started catching on. They were both trying to cover it up, but Sam was getting closer to the truth. And that's when it looks like things took a deadly turn. Claire was silent for a long moment, her mind reeling from the unexpected turn of events. David, someone she had known and trusted, had been involved in a scheme to deceive Sam. But it didn't make sense. Why would David go this far? Why would he push things to the point of hurting Sam, or worse, killing him? As if reading her thoughts, Collins continued. David must have realized that Sam was getting suspicious. When Sam confronted him about the affair, he probably panicked. He knew he was already in too deep with the money issues and the affair. If Sam had exposed him, his life would have been ruined. And that's when he decided to take matters into his own hands. Claire's mind spun as she processed the chain of events that had led up to that night. David had been cornered, and in his desperation, he had done something unthinkable. The truth was far darker than she had ever imagined. Where is he now? Claire asked, her voice cold with determination. We've got his location, Collins replied. He's been staying at a cabin out in the woods trying to lay low. We're moving in now. Claire nodded, standing up. She needed to see this through. The pieces were finally falling into place, and she couldn't allow David to get away with what he had done. She had to face him. She had to know the full extent of his betrayal. Hours later, Claire stood at the edge of the woods, watching as the police moved in on David's cabin. Her heart was racing, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions.